Hey everybody, Kelly Engineering here, and welcome to the Mod Spotlight on RFTools Dimensions. This is going to be a very long episode. I am going to go over every single facet of this mod, and then I'm going to end it by making a dimension that is entirely emeralds, because that seems to be, or ender dragons, because that seems to be what people really use RFTools Dimensions for. It complements Project E very well. But I'm going to put timestamps in the description of this video, because every time I switch gears, like when I go from the energy extractor to the activity probe, so on and so forth, I'm just going to timestamp that so you can click and view what part you actually care about in RFTools Dimensions. Well, without further ado, let's get to it. So the first thing in RFTools Dimensions that you care about are these Dimlet Parcels, and Dimlet Parcels are found in loot chests, generally in a stronghold, but there are other, they're part of other loot tables. They're also part of the Enderman loot table as well. Very rarely they drop from Endermen. So what the Dimlet Parcel is once you open it, it gives you between 2 and 5 Dimlet parts. So actually the Dimlet base part I'm kind of glad we do have. But these Dimlet parts are used to create Dimlets, and the Dimlets are used to create dimensions. So I'm going to throw this in here, but each one of the Dimlet parts serves a specific function. It's kind of like a circuit board when you're trying to create a Dimlet. But each of these means something different. I'm not going to go over what each one means, but I will say that there are differing rarities. So like this advanced memory unit is a uncommon Dimlet part, but stuff like the Dimlet control circuit rarity 0 are going to be very common. Same with the basic energy modules, so on and so forth. It's pretty obvious to tell which ones are common, uncommon, and rare. What you'll be doing with all those Dimlet parts is you will be making a Dimlet Workbench from 4 gold ingots, a piece of redstone, a machine frame from RFTools, and if I didn't mention it before, RFTools Dimensions does require RFTools to be installed in your pack. It is a dependency. But the machine frame, 2 workbenches, and a base Dimlet part. And the base Dimlet part is a requirement. This isn't like OR dictionary or anything like that. It does require the base part in order to make. And the base part is a pretty common thing. You shouldn't have any issue getting it. But until you get one, you can't actually make the Dimlet Workbench. The Dimlet Workbench is able to be infused using the infuser from RFTools. You can actually infuse up the Dimlet Workbench, and it will not require as much power. And so that's actually pretty much it, yeah. You can store all of your Dimlet parts in here, and over here is a list of various features that a Dimlet can hold, or that a dimension can hold, rather. What RFTools Dimension does is it actually looks through your mod pack on its first startup, and it will find every fluid, every terrain type, every biome, so on and so forth, and it will actually allow you to create a Dimlet for it. So this is from Abyssalcraft. RFTools recognized that Abyssalcraft had a biome called the Corallium Infested Swamp, and thus added it as a Dimlet that you can create. Oh, that is absolutely fantastic, and you shouldn't have any problem getting something that you really want. And there are also weather Dimlets, type controller, nice. There are biome configuration Dimlets. And effect Dimlets are really fun. When you create a dimension, there's a chance that there's going to be a random effect in there, like night vision, or this one is confusion. So once you get into the dimension, you're always going to have the confusion debuff on you. So the Dimlet Workbench does require all of these Dimlet parts, but there are other things that are required in order to create your specific biome or terrain or time, things like that. And you can see down at the bottom that this requires 6 things to create. If I double click in there, then it will move if I have the proper Dimlet part, it will move it down here in order to create it. However, I'm missing the last thing, and the Darklands Forest does require a Darklands Forest Biome Absorber. Unfortunately, I can't actually make one of those for you. All I can make is really a desert. So these are all of the absorbers that go into creating a Dimlet. You have the terrain absorber, which is a machine frame for wool, and then dirt, sand, gravel, and cobblestone. And how each of these absorbers work, and I already have one right here that is for a block of emerald for later on in the episode. But if you take one of the material absorbers and then you place it down, any item, any common item that is below it will immediately be grabbed by it and it will become that material. So you can see that it's starting to eat all of this sandstone right now, and block sandstone is quickly becoming this material. Alright, it is now 100% a sandstone material, so I need to actually go into game mode survival and pick this up. Boom. So now that I have this material absorber, which is configured for sandstone, if I wanted to create a sandstone dimlet, then I would need to go to the sandstone, double click, and you see that it automatically moved that material absorber with the sandstone configuration in here, and I can make a material dimlet sandstone. Now, even though that I have a block sandstone here, if I wanted to make like a chiseled sandstone, obviously it wouldn't work because it requires a chiseled sandstone material. And that is one of the checks and balances of the mod to make sure that you can't just OP stuff. Oh, if you are in creative mode, and I'll put myself back in creative mode, then all you have to do is shift, double click, and you just get that dimlet willy-nilly. You can also, if you have a completed dimlet, put it in here with the extract button selected, and once you go in there, it'll actually figure out what you used to make that dimlet, and it will give you all of the parts back with the exception of the absorber that went into creating it. So this Biome Absorber for a Darklands Mountains, I will never get back. I would have to make one every single time I wanted to make a Darklands Mountain biome. And just so I can show you that in action, I'm going to make the sandstone material dimlet, and I'm going to put it in the extract mode and get all of those dimlet parts back. And now that it's complete, I do not get that sandstone back. I would have to make another material absorber with sandstone in order to make that dimlet again. Now that we've gone over the material absorber, I'm going to go over the liquid absorber next. The liquid absorber is a machine frame, 4 pieces of wool, and 4 buckets, and operates much the same as the material absorber does. All you need to do is, hold on, let me get this out the pedestal, is set it on top of a liquid of your choice, and it will start to absorb that liquid. So, whoops. There we go. So it's a little difficult to get the liquid that you want, especially if you want liquid emerald or if you want liquid corallium, stuff like that. It's a little difficult because you have to collect all of that liquid in the first place and then make it available for the liquid absorber to absorb. So I am going to put a cut here and then go to someplace that isn't a massive desert and show the liquid absorber in action, and also a easy way for you to get liquid to the liquid absorber without having to move it around too much. So I am in a test world right now in the Nether, obviously, and I'm about to show you how the liquid absorber works. As I said before, it works just like the material absorber, whereas the item you want to absorb needs to be directly below it. But it's not as simple as that with the liquid. So I'm going to place this on an obsidian block, and despite that there is lava all around it, directly below it, it's not going to absorb it. And heck, I can even take this out, and now there isn't a full lava block below it, but it's still not absorbing anything. Put that obsidian back. Boop. So I'm going to destroy the liquid absorber, put another piece of obsidian, and then the liquid absorber. And you see that it's doing its work now. It needed one full block below it in order for it to start absorbing all of the lava around it. And so that is, it's a little overcomplicated, but you need to have one full block underneath it for it to start working and collecting all of the liquid you want. And below, look at that, it's already done. And that's how you, that's the normal way of doing it. So what if you have a fluid tank and you want to try to get the fluid into the liquid absorber? Well, conduits are out. Conduits won't connect to the liquid absorber. And neither will transfer nodes, for that matter. Come on. Yeah, transfer pipes won't. and even liquid translocators will not connect to the liquid absorber. The only way that I found to actually get this to work is just bucket it through, or I had another thing that I did. If you have actually additions in the pack, then, oh wow, that is stupid. If you have actually additions with the pack, then the fluid placer can actually just take something out and place it right above it. So it works with any tank and any conduit for that matter, so long as a fluid can go into the placer. And that's what I was doing in my Project Ozone 3 world in order to get the fluid. But the dimension ended up being too expensive to do liquid emerald, so I kind of scrapped it. But yeah, that is how I was doing it. It was the only way I found that I could actually get fluid placed into the world, other than, like, I suppose dispensers. But then you would have to constantly fill buckets in. So that's one way about it, and that is the liquid absorber. So the next one is the Biome Absorber, which is made with a machine frame, 4 pieces of wool, 2 dirt, and 2 saplings. And it operates just like the fluid and material. You place it in the biome that you want, and it will slowly absorb the aspects of those biomes. So this is obviously a desert one. I have nothing but desert around me. So yeah, that's it's really that simple. That's all you need to do to make the biome. It's just a matter of finding the biome, especially if it's a rare one, like a mushroom island or what have you. The next is the Terrain Absorber, which is where we start getting some really weird stuff going on. And that is made with 2 pieces of smooth stone, 2 pieces of dirt, wool, and the machine frame. So I have this one right here, which has absorbed normal terrain. And normal terrain is what this flat world counts as. It is not flat, otherwise it would be flat. This counts as normal, as if it was like a plains or something. A plains would be considered a normal terrain type, and you could have it be a mountainous terrain. There are all sorts, and if you look over here in the Dimlets, let's type in terrain. So you have like an amplified, cavern, chaotic, and chaotic is really weird. Flat world, which we're in right now. Island, islands. It's so there's all sorts of different types of terrain that you can absorb. Mostly applying to how the vanilla game is. So you got to be careful when you're placing the terrain absorber that you are actually in the terrain you want to be in. The next absorber we're going to go for is another very odd one, and that is the feature absorber. The feature absorber is 2 emeralds, 2 diamonds, 4 pieces of wool, and the machine frame. Now, what makes this one really weird is it will only absorb the feature of an RFTools dimension. So if let's take this out, try to place it down right here, it won't actually start absorbing any random features of this dimension. And honestly, there really aren't any features of this dimension anyway. But still, I could go to an overworld dimension, a dimension 0 or a dimension 1, and it won't work. You have to be in an RFTools created dimension. And I will actually show that off to you when we get to actually creating a dimension. But yeah, that's the feature. It's an odd one, especially if you want a feature like huge orbs, stuff like that. The last one is the weirdest of all, and that is the Time Absorber, which is made with 4 clocks, 4 wool, and the machine frame. I have a little setup over here, and Dimlet Noon, 10%. That's great. So what makes this one super weird is you need to supply a redstone pulse to the Time Absorber around the time that you want. So right now it's 7, and I actually already got 1 pulse into here at noontime, and I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm not really worried about it. I just wanted to show it off. However, you're going to have to wait 10 days in order for the Time Absorber to absorb the necessary time that you want. Because you see that it's at 10% right now. Also because I supplied the pulse at noontime on one of the days, and it absorbed the noontime. Then you have to wait for noontime the next day, supply the pulse, so on and so forth. Do that a total of 10 times, and your Time Absorber will be complete. So that is the Time Absorber. This is honestly not the way that you should be doing it. It can be done with a lever, if I'm honest. But yeah, that's the Time Absorber, and that is the last of the absorbers that we're going to go through. The next thing we're going to be going over is Dimlet Types, and the first one are the Terrain Dimlets. So Terrain Dimlets define what your dimension is going to look like. So we're currently in a flat terrain, and a normal overworld would be normal, or skylands, so on and so forth. There are a bunch of different types that you don't normally see in vanilla Minecraft, such as this invertigo and these waves, and we'll go over what those actually look like once we start creating dimensions. The next one is the digit dimlet, and the digit dimlets, and there are 1 through 9. What the digit dimlets do is they allow you to use the same set of dimlets, but still allow you to get a unique dimension. So say that you created a dimension and you really like the fact that it has, it's essentially making the same dimension parameters with a different seed. And that's not 100% what it is, but if you think about it like that, it makes sense when you use the digit dimlets. The next one is the Biome Dimlets, and the Biome Dimlets kind of speak for themselves. So I have a mesa and a desert here, and when combined with the terrain dimlets, that means I have a desert biome that is in invertigo terrain, or a mesa biome that is in wave terrain, so on and so forth. The biomes, terrain, material, and fluids all work together to make your dimension. But those are what biomes are. They speak for themselves. The controller dimlet is how you actually control those biomes. So if I have 2 biomes in my dimension, the desert and the mesa, then this controller dimlet checker will make sure that each of the biomes is in a checkerboard pattern. So it's checkerboard mesa, then mesa, then desert, so on and so forth. There are a bunch of controller dimlets, and I'll pull them up right now. Controller. So you have checker, cold, default, dry. Dry means that there's currently not craftable. Well, a lot of these are currently not craftable. So these are the stuff that isn't craftable. You'll more than likely, or you can possibly, find in one of your created dimension in one of the huts. But the checkerboard pattern is one of your controller dimlets, and it's just how it wants the biomes to be configured. Material dimlets and liquid dimlets, I don't feel like I need to go over. This is just what your feature or your terrain or what have you is going to be made out of. So I can put a material dimlet and then a terrain dimlet. And because the material dimlet is in front of the terrain knows that it should be making, whenever there is a wave generated, it should be made out of Certus quartz ore, so on and so forth. And that doesn't stop there. So I can have the waves made out of Certus quartz ore, and then use the abyssalnite cobblestone, put another terrain dimlet in there, and it means that whenever invertigo happens, that it'll be made out of abyssal cobblestone, so on and so forth. I could also have waves generate out of Certus quartz ore and abyssal cobblestone. It all depends on how you order your dimlets when you're making your dimension. Next are the feature dimlets, and the feature dimlets are like I described in the absorbers. You need to actually go into a dimension in order to absorb these features. So this is ores aplenty, which is essentially you're going to be getting a bunch of ores. Most stone is going to be replaced with some sort of ore. Then I have tendrils here, and tendrils are really cool looking, especially if you make it out of a nice material. These operate the same as the terrain dimlets, where you can put a material before it, and it will make that feature out of that material. Next is structure dimlets, so controls the generation of various structures in the world. There are structure generations for each structure in Minecraft. So desert temple, dungeons, fortresses, you could make a dimension that is entirely made out of fortresses or strongholds, stuff like that. And if you make a dimension out of that stuff, then it's easy loot. So that is the structure dimlet. I don't use them very often, but they are absolutely viable. By the time you get to RFTools and whatever mod pack you're in, you may not be worried about all of the loot that you get in villages or strongholds, so on and so forth. Next is the mob dimlet. And the mob dimlet controls what type of mobs can spawn in addition to normal mob spawning. So if I put a wolf dimlet inside my dimension, then that means more wolves than anything are going to spawn in, but that's not going to stop zombies or skeletons or what have you. You'll need a peaceful dimlet for that, which is one of those special ones I was talking about. Sky dimlets. Sky dimlets are an oddity, and it's really just all for aesthetics. It doesn't change anything about the dimension except for what sky color is. So this is black clouds. Right now, if I actually had clouds on, hold on, let's turn the clouds on. Right now I have white clouds. If I put that black cloud dimlet inside my dimension, then the clouds would be black. Kind of speaks for itself. You can also change the what type of fog shows up. You can make the moon very large in the sky, stuff like that. But these are all of the things that you can change your sky to. You can change the clouds, you can change the actual sky. The sun can be like right in your face. Or in a normal Sky Factory world, you'll notice that you have that little rainbow thing and that massive planet, and that is also, since it's in Project Ozone 3, RFTools Dimensions recognizes it and will allow you to create that sky in your dimension. Time dimlets are another thing that speak for themselves. So you have time fast or time noon. The time fast dimlet can't really be created because I don't know how to get that specific time absorber, like fast. So I cheated this one in, but there is a chance that you could find a fast time dimlet in your created dimensions. So if you can't create it, then you may just get lucky and find it in one of your dimensions. But yeah, time is just noon, morning, dusk, evening, midnight, stuff like that, as well as a fast, a slow. Well, the weather dimlets are fun. The weather dimlets will make it so that the dimension is always raining. So if you have a sky that's black clouds, then you could have black clouds. It's always hard thunder. And there aren't a lot of weather dimlets, and I have never manually made a dimension with a weather dimlet inside it. But a randomly generated dimension can sometimes be thunderstorms constantly, rain constantly. It'll never stop raining or thundering. And then you have effect dimlets. Effect dimlets give you constant potion effects inside the dimension. So this one is an effect dimlet for flight, but there's an effect dimlet for strength. So every time that I'm in the... whoops. So absorption, blindness, brutal mobs, confusion. It's a whole bunch of mob types, or it's a whole bunch of potion effects. So those are what the effects do. The 5 special dimlets I was talking about before are the Peaceful Dimlet. This dimlet prevents hostile mobs from spawning in your dimension except for the mobs you manually add, and I explained that when I was going over the Wolf Mob Dimlet. It is very expensive, and it will never be randomly generated in dimensions that you create. So the Peaceful Dimlet, type in Peaceful, isn't even in here. So go to the Dimlet Workbench, Peaceful. So yeah, Peaceful, it's actually really not that difficult to create. But it does, as it said, use a lot of energy. I haven't gone over what each of the Dimlet stuff what each of the Dimlet stuff is, with this create cost, maintain cost, and tick cost. I'll go over that after I get done explaining all of these special ones. But you also have the efficiency dimlets and the mediocre efficiency dimlets. So whenever you create a dimension with an efficiency dimlet, that means that it will not consume 20% less power in order to maintain the dimension. But in order to create it, it will double that cost. The same with the mediocre efficiency. The mediocre efficiency doesn't work as well as the efficiency, but it is still there, mediocre efficiency. The shelter dimlet, so say you used an effect dimlet that gave you brutal mobs and strong mobs, and the second you spawn in, there's a good chance of death. The shelter dimlet will spawn you inside a shelter instead of on a platform like it normally does. And then the seed dimlet lets you control what seed you spawn in on. But those are the special dimlets. Those are all of the actual dimlets, and we're going to move on. Now that you've created your dimlets, then the next thing you got to do is actually get those dimlets to do something for a dimension. So you need to create something called an empty dimension tab, which is just redstone and paper. Very simple. But once you create one, you make a dimension inscriber. A dimension inscriber is made with 2 pieces of redstone, a machine frame, 2 ink sacs, and 3 iron ingots. Oh, and a piece of paper. It does require power, but this is what it looks like. All you have to do is put your dimension tab in here, and you'll see that there's a store button. So I am going to actually, without putting any dimlets in here whatsoever, I'm just going to name this random, and this is where you input the name of your dimension, and store. So this is now a realized dimension tab. Everything about it is random. There is, I have no idea what I will be getting into whenever I decide to realize this dimension, but in order to realize the dimension, you need dimension builders. The dimension builder is 2 diamonds, an emerald, 2 ender pearls, the machine frame, and 3 gold ingots. All you have to do is put your realized dimension tab in here, and it will go through the process of actually generating and creating that dimension. And so long as the realized dimension tab is in here, it will constantly gain power as well. So you don't have to worry about the dimension losing power. So now that the dimension has been created, I can actually remove the realized dimension tab from here, and you can see that the dimension is still going, but the power is going down. In order for your dimensions to actually be accessible, you need to have a constant supply of power. So make sure that the dimension that you go into the most is in your realized dimension tab, or you can even have multiple dimension builders constantly powering your dimensions. There is a total of 40 million RF that can be housed in a dimension. The power cost that I mentioned earlier, and if you look at any of your dimlets, it will show what contribution it gives to the power drain in your dimension. So this effect dimlet flight means that in order to create the dimension, it's going to require 200 more RF per tick. To maintain it, it will cost nothing. However, tick cost 100 ticks is how much power will be draining when I am actively in the dimension. So those are what those three mean. Create for creating the dimension, maintain for maintaining the dimension, and tick for your player character to actually be in the dimension. And it can get pretty expensive with higher tier materials and higher tier terrain in your dimension. But now that I have a realized dimension, all you have to do is go to a dialing device from RFTools, and once you realize a dimension, it will automatically populate inside your dialing device. So this is dimension ID 16, codename random. If I dial it, then that means I can go to this dimension at any time I want. And that's what I'm going to do now. Remember, this is a completely random dimension. I have no idea what it's going to be. So it looks like I am in primarily a desert biome. Of course, cows are spawning. And, oh, Tunis. So this is land core. This is a land core biome. So this is a very weird biome indeed. Let's see, is the sun moving? The sun is not moving, so it is constantly stuck at, it looks like, which way am I pointing? I am constantly stuck at sunrise in this dimension whenever I'm inside it. And everything about it is completely random. I don't know if this is completely solid. Let's check that out. Oh, so it's a cavern dimension. So I just dug down and I am, it spawned me up top, but I am in a cavern dimension with water and, well, this is actually a pretty cool dimension. Let me get some night vision for y'all. There we go. I am, yeah, it's a cavern dimension. It's actually pretty cool. So what I am going to do, now that I know that this is a cavern dimension, I am going to give myself a feature absorber and place it down. So now this is, the feature absorber is working on an unknown feature, and it does take a while. So you're not going to know what feature it has absorbed until it's at 100%. But I'm guessing that it's going to be large caverns. Oh wow, you can see the clouds moving through the roof of the cavern. In any case, so yeah, the feature absorber will take an unknown feature from a dimension, or a random feature from a dimension, and turn it into something that you can use to make a dimlet out of. So I've just placed down 2, and I'm going to wait for them to populate with whatever feature they decide to populate with. And there we go. So now that the feature absorber is at 100%, it went from unknown feature to lakes. So this is a lake feature. And then this one will more than likely be either lakes or giant caverns. It takes whatever feature in a randomly generated dimension or a manually generated dimension, just a random one, and will make your feature absorber. This does not work in normal dimensions, I'll say it again. Regardless, you can make multiple dimensions and try to go for multiple features. One of the bonuses of using the No Dimlets in a Dimension tab method is the fact that this uses virtually no power to maintain, which is fantastic because I'm in a dimension that is permanent sunrise. I'm in a dimension that has permanent lakes, quite a bit of ore actually. But the next thing that we're going to go over is these little huts that are over here. And I actually probably already passed a couple. Regardless, going over to, this is not one of the huts. This is a weird feature. But these huts right here are spawned in all RFTools Dimensions, RFTools Dimensions dimensions. So inside it is a chest with like a Dimlet parcel, a couple of Dimlet parts, and some actual Dimlets. So this is a material Dimlet for Cobblestone Array, so that material is from Chisel. Sky Dimlet for Dark Red, and a Feature Dimlet for Orbs, which are all very awesome. These dimensional huts are also made out of two unique materials, this dimensional blank block and the dimensional cross block, and you may find a use to build with some of them. One of the great things about having this little redstone lamp in here is you can just flick the lever and turn on the light, and whenever you're roaming around a dimension you know nothing about, you know that you visited a dimension because the light's on. And I have night vision on right now, so... Well, I'm going to go into this one as well, and... Ooh, Feature Dimlet Maze. Nice. Material Dimlet for Netherrack, a block of cobalt, and white stained glass. Excellent. But that is how you get different materials for the... if you can't manage to get the right material or right fluid for absorbers, then you can just spawn a random dimension, go through, and once again, a dimension made out of dimensional cross blocks. Birch Forest for Biome. Body Red Moon. Absorption 2 and Invisibility. That's actually a really good one. So that's enough with the huts. Now what we need to worry about is getting home. Because if you... I didn't really go over the platform you spawn in on whenever you get into a random dimension. I'm going to head back to that platform now. Here it is. This is the platform that you generally spawn on in your RFTools Dimensions. It's made out of terracotta, has 2 pieces of glowstone, and a matter receiver. So the matter receiver is not a matter transmitter. How are you supposed to get home? Whenever you go into an RFTools Dimension, and FTB Utilities is not in the pack, so it's not like I could just set home whatever. So make sure that you always bring another dialing device, and they're not very expensive. Oh, I just spelled dial wrong. That might have something to do with it. So make sure you bring another dialing device and another transmitter. And all you have to do is just place that down, place the dialing device down, go to my overworld receiver, dial it. Oh, and connection was interrupted because I am not powering this thing at all. So power also has to be applied to both the transmitter and the dialing device. It's kind of sucky, but that is how you get home, by bringing another dialing device, another matter transmitter, and something to power both of them. The next item we're going to go over is the Dimension Editor, which is made with 3 gold ingots, 2 diamonds, 1 emerald, the machine frame, and 2 pieces of redstone. What the Dimension Editor does, and hang on, let me actually grab this Dimension tab right here. What the Dimension Editor does is any realized dimension, and if you're not happy with it, then you can put it in here, and then any random Dimlet, you can add it to the Dimension tab. So this is obviously not going to go very fast for you right now because this thing is not infused. It does take a little while. There it goes. So apparently the Ores of Plenty feature Dimlet can't go in there, but the invisibility one certainly can. So I now have Realized Dimension tab. Dimension ID number 16, which was my random, now has invisibility in it. I'm going to throw this back in here so it can get some power, and I'm going to head back into the dimension. And there you have it. Now that I'm back in the randomly generated dimension, I am invisible. So if you need to edit if you're not happy with one aspect of one of your dimensions, just use the Dimension Editor change one of those dimlets around, and wham bam, you got it the way you want it. Now that we've gone over what happens when you make a dimension that has no dimlets in it, we're going to make a dimension that does have dimlets in it. So I'm going to remove random from here. And now I have my empty dimension tab by just putting it in here and then extracting. If dimlets were in here, all of those dimlets would get extracted right back in. No problem there. I'm going to grab these dimlets that I had earlier. Whoop. And I'm going to place them back inside the dimension inscriber. So, you can already see that this has a warning. This has more than one using more than one terrain is not useful. And there are dangling modifiers in this descriptor. So, I have those two terrain dimlets right here, waves and invertigo. I'm going to get rid of invertigo, and that warning just went away. But now there are dangling modifiers in this descriptor. So what that means is I have a terrain dimlet that doesn't have a material directly in front of it. And I should have another material as well. And this material is all the way over here, but I have nothing here that actually takes the material. So put it over here, and now I have OK. This is a A-OK dimension to make. Now it's still going to be absolute chaos because I haven't organized this in the slightest. So I have my Biome Controller right here. Biome Dimlet Mesa. Where's my other biome? Right there. So I've taken care of a couple of the dangling modifiers, but even though there isn't a warning anymore, it's still going to let me create this dimension. I'm going to call this Test 1. And then I'm going to store it. So every single one of those dimlets is now inside this realized dimension. It's called Test 1. It's dimension ID. I don't even know what dimension ID because I haven't built the dimension yet. So I'm going to throw this inside the dimension builder and see how slow this is going to be going. And it's going to be draining power like nobody's business. That's because to create this, I need 133,000 RF per tick in order to make. And then to maintain it, I need 67,000 RF per tick. And then just me being in the dimension is 4,276. It's, yeah, absolutely insane. So I'm going to wait for this dimension to be realized. It's quite an expensive dimension, obviously. And then we're going to go in and see what happens. Alright, this dimension is now at 100%, so it is ID number 17, and if you look down at the bottom, it says maintenance cost is still 67,000, but the current power of the dimension is not rising very fast. So, I could enter this dimension and the power could start draining rather fast. You see that it just went back down to 0. So if I went into this dimension currently at this time, and once it gets to that 50,000 and completely drains the RF, I would die in the dimension. So yeah, once it gets to 500,000, it completely drained it. So I'm going to have to fix that before I go into this dimension. Or I'm going to have to go back to the drawing board, remove quite a bit of dimlets from this, and then we'll see what happens from there. Alright, with the help of some creative capacitor banks, I now have plenty of power flowing into this dimension, enough that I can actually go into the dimension. So let's dial it up, test 1, and go see what it's like. Wow, this is a trippy dimension. And also apparently, what was that? That's weird. Well, these are the tendrils that I was talking about, so we know that the tendrils are working just fine. Villages are everywhere. And yep, the waves are working just fine, just like they should. Oh, this is what the waves look like when it's actually in action. Oh, the tendrils are weird. Yeah, this is a very weird dimension, but it looks like it's operating as intended. So it looks like the mesa is what has the black sky. Oh, never mind. This is a thunderstorm. So thunderstorms are working fine. I don't know why it took so long for it to activate. Huh. Yeah, I'm very happy that this dimension worked. but I'm going to mess with it a little bit, make it into something that actually looks good, and yeah, I'll be right back with you. So this is test 2 of the same dimension that I just showed you. Now as you can actually see the checkerboard between the mesa and the desert. That's all well and good, but I am in a void right now. I did not choose a material for the feature, so the tendrils just are made out of netherrack because that's what the dimension decided they should be made out of. And I also did not choose a world type, a terrain type, so it decided on void. Or I guess it decided on a Skylands, not a void. But still, this is what happens when you don't assign materials to your features or your world types. Yeah, this is really nice. Alright, I am going to go in for test 3 now by actually putting in a proper terrain and actually telling the tendrils to be made out of something. Alright, this is test number 3. And as you can see, I used a, well, I guess you couldn't really see, but I used a normal terrain dimlet in order to configure this. So I have very obvious squares going on here because the desert and the mesa are still doing checkerboards, but it's actually doing its normal desert and mesa terrain. I actually have no idea why the Dreadium cobblestone decided to spawn in there. I had no dangling modifiers or nothing else that required a modifier. That is weird to me. But still, I did choose prismarine bricks for the tendrils, and it still has the villages spawning everywhere. It's also high noon all the time. I didn't go over that one in test 1. But this is how you make a dimension. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm taking this tab out of here, and I'm going to just let the power drain. I'm not going to restore any power, but I'm going to head into the dimension anyway. So keep in mind that I am entering a non-powered dimension. So I have this dimension monitor right here, and hang on, let's bring up. So the dimension monitor is made with a redstone comparator, dimensional shard, and 3 redstone, and whenever you enter an RFTools dimension, it will automatically figure out that you are in an RFTools dimension and show you how much power is in the dimension, which is very handy. So I'm going to let this thing drop to 0, and I'm going to die inside the dimension. Alright, we're very quickly losing the power, and I'm in creative mode, so whoops. Game mode S. There we go, I died. So I'm going to respawn in the regular world. And the next item we're going to need to go over is the phased field generator. The phased field generator is made with 4 redstone, 4 dimensional shards, and an Eye of Ender. I'm going to give myself one and let it charge up in this wireless charger, or correction, wired charger. So what the phased field generator does is right there in the tooltip. But if a dimension is not powered and I have died in there, obviously you want your stuff back. So the phased field generator will allow you to enter a dimension that is not powered. And it essentially puts you in creative temporarily as far as death is concerned, so that you can go grab your stuff and get out of the dimension as quick as possible. It drains rather quickly, so you got to make sure that you get in, get your stuff, get out, and then find a way to power the dimension again in order for it to work. But the phased field generator holds 1 million RF, and now that I have it in my inventory, I have to have it in my hotbar. So I'm going to go back into the dimension and keep in mind that it is once again not powered. But even though it's not powered, and wow, the sky is dark because it's not powered, I'm also moving incredibly slow. I have ghostly shape is Corail, but mining fatigue 3, hunger 3, and slowness, so as not to take advantage of the fact that you're invulnerable. So I'm going to grab my stuff, boom, and get back to the world. But that is what the phased field generator does, and of course I'm still going a little bit slow. I'm going to drop the tab back in there, let it get some power back going. Awesome. And yeah, that is what the phased field generator does. When you're holding the Realize Dimension tab in your hand, and I have the ID 16 No Dimlets inserted, if you shift right click, it'll actually show you what random things are inside your dimension. So the base seed of the dimension is this, World version 2, Terrain Low Cavern. Its base block is stone, it's a dry with feature lakes, which is why the feature absorber was only getting lakes. It was the only feature in that dimension. But effect invisibility is something that I added when I did the dimension editor. So that is what all of those are. Celestial angle 0.75, which means that is sunrise. And the cloud, sky, and fog are the generic colors. But shift right clicking is a good way to know what is actually in your dimension after it's been realized. So I've created a dimension here that spawns ender dragons, and it was no problem for me since I'm in creative and I could just make the dimlet. But if you wanted to make one of these things, I forgot to go over how to actually make mob dimlets. So yeah, I do have this dimension. I'll go over what I did in order to create it, but it is a end biome, and time is flowing normally. I couldn't have this dimension going if time ticks were off. Otherwise, the ender dragons were not spawning under any circumstance. So I'm going to head back into the real world, show you what I did in order to make this, and then go over how to actually make a mob dimlet. So this is my ender dragon dimlet. I have Biome Dimlet, the end, Terrain Dimlet, void, Weather default, feature, structure, and effect at default or none. And then I have 2 ender dragon dimlets in here. So the ender dragon dimlets actually don't cost that much to create or maintain the dimension. And if memory serves, I think I've put like 6 ender dragon dimlets into the dimension. Not sure if it has any effect, but it sure was fun. So if you look at mob dimlets, you'll see that instead of having an absorber, it has a little syringe over there, down at the bottom. So the syringes are from RFTools base. And in order to get that to work, I'm going to head back into the dimension and go find one of these ender dragons, and then right-click it with the syringe. I'm not sure if it's going to work with me in creative, so let's try it out. Oh, another thing about the ender dragons. So the ender dragons will, of course, try to... Whoop. There we go. So you see that I'm actually filling up the syringe right now just by hitting the ender dragons. And once that syringe is full, and I have a full syringe, 100% essence level, then you can go and make the mob dimlet. And it really wasn't that difficult. So as I was saying, all of the ender dragons are going to try to go to 0, 0, as if the normal end crystal was right here. But of course, more than one dragon can't be there, so you're going to have a little bit of glitchiness. And yeah, see, that one just flew off. That is an ender dragon dimlet, ender dragon dimension. And yeah, that's all I'm going to say about this one. I've reconstructed the dimlet, and I now have 6 ender dragon dimlets inside this dimension, and still only a maximum of 4 ender dragons are spawning. So the amount of dimlets you have does not actually affect the amount of mob spawns, which is unfortunate, but if you want to save power in this dimension, 1 ender dragon dimlet will do. Finally, we have this, which is probably the most basic dimension you could probably have, and the most expensive. This is a flat world entirely made out of emerald blocks, and usually I'm at Y level 63, so we still have quite a ways to dig down in order to even scratch the amount of emeralds that are in this dimension. So, yeah, I'm going to head back into the real world, and you better, if you're going to make this dimension, you have to make sure that you have more than enough power to handle everything, as it will very quickly tap most energy resources dry. So, here is the dimension, emerald. It only has 3 dimlets inside it. And even then, you'll really only need 2, because I have the efficiency dimlet in here, just to make sure that I wasn't using too much power. But all I need is a material dimlet block of emerald, and a terrain dimlet flat. That's it. You still run the risk of running this dimension and not having, or having some stray modifiers show up, but As you can see, I was a little bit lucky. So Biome Controller, default, effect Hunger 3, which I would probably have, now that I know that Hunger 3 is in there, all I have to do is put an effect Dimlet none. Body small moon, I'm not worried about that. Weather, I'm not worried about. Yeah, this is, I got pretty lucky with all the random stuff that is in this dimension. Regardless, that is how you make an emerald dimension, and that is where I'm going to end this episode. One last thing that I forgot to say, this is a chunk loader from Chicken Chunks, and it is in the same chunk as my dimension builder and my creative capacitor banks. It's absolutely necessary because the second you enter a dimension, of course this area is going to become unloaded, and no power can get to your realized dimension tab. So entering the dimension, if there's not enough power, it's a very it takes a lot of power to maintain the dimension, then you're gonna die in there. So yeah, have a chunk loader. It's absolutely necessary to keep yourself from dying. Well, with that, I am Kelly Engineering, and if I missed anything, and if I inevitably missed something, then put it in the comments, and I'll make sure it gets pinned so that people know that any of the information I missed if they watch all 52 minutes of this episode. Well, I hope that you enjoyed the mod spotlight, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.